Welcome back to our studios here in Lahore. I'm Hamza Amjad, and let's start the bulletin in Mexico, where police have found 9 bodies hanging from a bridge in Mexico City alongside a drug cartel banner threatening rivals. Police say 10 more bodies have been found hacked up and dumped beside a nearby road. The killing spree was reported in the western state of Michoacan. State Governor Lopez Solis says rival gangs are fighting over territory to control drug activity in the area. In Egypt, security forces have killed 17 suspected militants in 2 separate raids. The Interior Ministry says 8 militants were killed in Fayoum province when security forces stormed their hideout near Cairo. It says a similar raid in a suburb of the capital killed 9 others. The raid came 4 days after a car bombing killed 20 people outside Cairo's main cancer hospital. The ministry says the Hassam militant group was responsible for the bombing. The India-imposed siege of occupied Kashmir has entered its 5th day amid a blanket curfew and a complete communications cutoff. Little information is known from the valley due to the blackout, but there are reports of clashes between Kashmiri protesters and Indian forces. Several Kashmiris are known to have been shot dead amid the arrests of more than 500 people. More in this report.
Kashmiris living beyond the reach of India's occupation have feared the worst for their brethren since they were cut off from the world on Sunday evening. Both angered and worried by the situation, hundreds of Kashmiris staged a demonstration in Muzaffarabad, capital of Azad Kashmir. Many fear for the well-being of their relatives living under a siege enforced by 900,000 Indian troops. The Kashmiri protesters visited the office of UN ceasefire monitors to register their complaint against India's state terrorism.
We appeal to the United Nations to find a peaceful solution and grant us self-determination before the situation propels us towards a nuclear war.
Demanding the right of self-determination for Kashmiris, the protesters condemned India's unilateral and illegal accession of the occupied state.
We will be standing up for our right at all costs. Any solution in which the Kashmiris are not involved will not be acceptable to the Kashmiris under any circumstances.
On August the 5th, New Delhi revoked Article 370 of India's constitution, ending Kashmir's special status as a disputed territory. The move has provoked a furious reaction from Pakistan and fueled global concerns of conflict in the region.
Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi has met his Chinese counterpart Wang Yi to discuss India's revocation of occupied Kashmir's special status. Since Sunday, New Delhi has imposed a crushing curfew and a communications blackout in occupied Kashmir. Over 500 Kashmiris have been arrested, including 100 former members of the State Assembly and 2 ex-chief ministers. With the India-imposed lockdown into its 5th day, residents of the occupied valley are suffering from food and water shortages. Yemen's Houthi rebels say one of their top leaders has been assassinated. The deceased, Ibrahim al-Houthi, was the brother of Houthi chief Abdul Malik al-Houthi. Meanwhile, clashes between government forces and separatists in the southern port city of Aden have intensified. Military officials say heavy weapons have been deployed in the fighting for control of the presidential palace. No casualties have yet been reported. Iran says the U.S. naval coalition will cause regional insecurity in the Gulf and the Middle East. Defense Minister Brigadier General Amir Hatami says the Persian Gulf security can be maintained by regional states. Talking to his Kuwaiti, Qatari and Omani counterparts, Hatami proposed a Gulf security dialogue. The Iranian minister says Tehran is providing security in the Persian Gulf, the Strait of Hormuz and the Gulf of Oman. He warned that Israel's inclination to join the U.S. military coalition could cause a catastrophe in the Persian Gulf region. Tehran's state media says Qatar and Kuwait are satisfied with Iran's role in providing security for the Gulf. While the UN says fresh fighting in northwest Syria after the collapse of a brief ceasefire threatens the lives of millions. It says the risk of civilian casualties has risen, with people returning to their homes during a break in the fighting. UN's humanitarian chief for Syria, Panos Mumtiz, said panic has gripped the region. He said over 500 civilians have been killed and 400,000 displaced since fighting escalated in April. Syrian forces restarted operations after rebels targeted a military post in the region. Jailed PKK leader Abdullah Öcalan has offered talks with Turkey in return for a political solution to the Kurdish conflict. In a statement issued by his lawyers, Öcalan said he will not push for a separate state. Öcalan said he is ready to negotiate an end to the PKK's 35-year-old insurgency. He claimed that the Kurdish issue could be resolved within a week and called on Ankara to make concessions. The offer comes amid an escalation in Turkish air raids on PKK positions in neighboring northern Iraq. Earlier this week, Turkey and the US reached an agreement to establish and manage a safe zone in the Kurdish-populated northeast Syria. Hong Kong's chief executive Carrie Lam says protests against an extradition bill are hurting the territory's economy more than the SARS epidemic 17 years ago. Speaking after meeting business leaders, Lam said the unrest has hit Hong Kong's economy like a tsunami. She said business leaders are worried for the demonstration's long-term consequences.
As we have heard all our 33 business representatives told us, is to stop the violence and to say no to the chaotic situation that Hong Kong has experienced in the last few weeks so that we can move on.
Hong Kong has been embroiled in a political crisis since increasingly violent anti-government protests broke out in June. And now let's move on. The US and 5 European countries, including the UK, France and Germany, have asked Moscow to withdraw its forces from Georgia. Belgium, Estonia and Poland have also issued a joint statement on the 11th anniversary of the Georgian conflict. The countries are asking Moscow to abide by the EU-mediated ceasefire agreement reached in 2008. The joint statement marked the 11th anniversary of the Georgian conflict with South Ossetia. Georgia's foreign ministry says Moscow is impeding the creation of international security mechanisms. The UN has criticized the latest US sanctions against Venezuela, saying they will intensify the suffering of millions of people. This comes after Washington seized all Venezuelan government assets and banned commercial transactions. The UN Human Rights Chief, Michelle Bachelet, says the sanctions are extremely broad and will hit the most vulnerable in the society. Bachelet says she is extremely concerned the measures will worsen the country's humanitarian crisis. Meanwhile, Norway says it is in contact with Venezuela's government and opposition about resuming talks. President Nicolas Maduro has called off this week's round of Oslo-mediated discussions. U.S. Defense Secretary Mark Esper has met South Korean President Moon Jae-in in Seoul. The visit follows a series of missile tests by North Korea to express anger at the U.S. and South Korea's joint military exercises. It also comes amid escalating trade tensions between key U.S. allies, South Korea and Japan. In an earlier meeting with South Korean Defense Minister Jong Kyung-do, Esper agreed to jointly pursue diplomatic efforts to denuclearize North Korea. Esper said the two countries will continue to work together for regional peace.
Together with our allies from around the region, we will remain resolute in our enforcement of the United Nations Security Council resolutions until the North engages in complete, verifiable, irreversible denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula.
South Korean Defense Minister Jong also briefed U.S. Defense Secretary Esper about the ongoing trade dispute with Japan. He said Japanese restrictions on tech exports are hurting the economic relations and security cooperation with South Korea. Now let's move to Britain, which has put the entire onus of a no-deal Brexit on the EU, saying its rigid stance could cost both sides. Britain's foreign minister has pressed the European Union to amend the terms of Britain's withdrawal agreement. In an interview, Dominic Raab said the UK will have to adopt a hard Brexit if the EU does not alter its stance. Raab said a second referendum on Brexit posed the biggest risk to the UK. The minister said the Irish backstop was unacceptable.
If the position from the EU is that the withdrawal agreement can't be changed, whether it's add-ons or subtractions, then at full stop, which is their position to date, then let's face it, they will be taking the decision to see the UK leave on no-deal terms, and that's the responsibility that they'll have to bear. We would like a deal, but the backstop, in its certainly in its current form, is undemocratic, and it's something that will have to be removed.
Well, Italy's 14-month-old ruling coalition has split after the right-wing League Party called for a no-confidence motion against the government. League Party Chief Deputy Prime Minister Matteo Salvini has called for snap elections, claiming that the government lost its parliamentary majority. Salvini says differences with coalition partner, the Five Star Movement, cannot be resolved. Five Star leader Luigi Di Maio says his party does not fear another election. Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte has asked Salvini to justify his call for fresh elections. And President Sergio Mattarella is the only person with the power to dissolve Italy's parliament. Kyrgyzstan's special forces have detained former President Almazbek Atambayev after a raid on his residence. This comes a day after an attempt to storm his compound left one officer dead and a police chief in critical condition. Former President Atambayev had ignored a police summons for questioning on corruption charges. His supporters say that these are politically motivated. In June, Kyrgyzstan's parliament stripped Atambayev of immunity and his official status as a former president. Let's move to China, which has declared a red alert as its densely populated east coast braces for the impact of a powerful typhoon. Super Typhoon Lakima is expected to make landfall in Zhejiang province on Saturday. It is battering Taiwan with winds topping 190 kilometers per hour. China's emergency ministry says rescue teams have been deployed along the eastern seaboard to deal with Lakima's impact. Thousands of Shanghai residents have been warned to prepare to evacuate their homes. Flood warnings have been issued for eastern sections of the Yangtze River and the Yellow River until next week. Jiangsu and Shandong provinces have also been placed on alert. And with that, we're going to take a short break, but don't go anywhere. More stories to follow. Welcome back. Now, more than 2 million Muslims have gathered in the holy city of Mecca for one of the most important rituals of Islam. Over the next 5 days, they will engage in prayers and rituals to fulfill one of their most solemn religious duties. More in this report.
Hajj is one of the 5 pillars of Islam, and Muslims must perform it at least once in their lives if they can afford to. The pilgrimage commemorates the sacrifices of Prophet Abraham, his wife Hagar, and their son, the Prophet Ismail. The pilgrims undertake religious rites that have remained unchanged since the founding of Islam 14 centuries ago. It is performed in 7 steps, starting from the 8th day of the lunar month of Zul Hajj. The ritual is performed in unison to create harmony and affection.
If you come here, you will benefit a lot. Praying with your brother Muslims, praying with your white brothers, because Islam will unite all of us, whether black or whether white, we are all together. So that's why I'm very happy.
The Hajj in Islam unifies Muslims of diverse ethnicity and nationalities.
You can see here people from all nations of the world, and all languages, all colors you find here. There is no difference. Unity is there, harmony is there. There is no quarrel, no any difference.
The Muslim festival of Eid al-Adha is celebrated at the end of the Hajj.
Well, tourists now face a €250 fine for sitting on Spanish steps in Rome. The police patrols the 18th century marble steps, blowing whistles at visitors sitting down. Built in 1725, the Spanish steps are part of the famous Piazza di Spagna in Rome. A UNESCO World Heritage Site, the monument has long been a favorite spot for tired visitors. People can be fined €400 for dirtying the steps leading to the Trinita de Monte Church. The measure is among a number of rules reinforced by the authorities to protect its monuments. This includes a ban on messy eating, jumping into fountains, and dragging wheeled suitcases down historic staircases. Well, an unorthodox Indian music star has won hearts online with her big teeth, lustrous white coat, four legs and melodic braying at mealtime. India's Emily, who is a donkey and not a girl, is used to transfer goods, has quickly become an internet sensation. More in this report.
Emily, a donkey living at an animal shelter in the Indian city of Pune, became an internet sensation after a clip of her singing went viral. Staff at the center, where cats, dogs, cows and even large buffaloes are cared for, were playing with Emily when she started crooning. They recorded a video of Emily showing off her vocal range and uploaded it on their social media page, where it became an instant hit.
I think it started because she liked to beg for treats. So the moment like she sees a treat bucket or she sees that it's time for food, she starts singing, and I think it's kind of her way of saying that I should get fed first.
But this building star has a long way to go now.
Well, today, August the 9th, marks the 74th anniversary of the United States dropping a second atomic bomb on Japan, this time at Nagasaki. The blast killed more than 74,000 people. More in this report.
In a ceremony commemorating the 74th anniversary of Nagasaki bombing, the city's mayor Tomohisa To read the peace declaration. He said knowledge of horror of war is an important first step to peace. The ceremony was held at Nagasaki's Peace Park. Mayor To said his heartfelt thoughts go out to the people who perished in the bombing.
I request the Japanese government to firmly maintain a philosophy of peace in the Japanese constitution, which outlines a determination to never go to war, and to also take leadership in spreading this idea to the world.
The current Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe wants to find ways to reduce the nuclear menace.
In order to create a meaningful outcome at the conference, I will take some suggestions from the last year's meeting for nuclear disarmament held in Nagasaki and actively work with other countries.
After the war, the victims suffered prolonged illnesses from their exposure to the bomb's radiation.
I will continue to appeal for abandoning nuclear weapons until I die. This is a way to honor the 200,000 people who lost their lives in Hiroshima and Nagasaki 74 years ago, and people who have been suffering the after effects of atomic bomb.
Japan had to surrender by August 15, 1945, marking the end of the Second World War.
Now to Kenya, the Nairobi National Museum is home to one of the world's largest collections of fossils, unrivaled in Eastern Africa. Recently, the bone structure of a previously unknown prehistoric carnivore was rediscovered in the museum's storage. Let's take a look.
Deep in the storage of Nairobi's National Museum, this unassuming drawer contains an archaeological gem. The giant jawbone of Africa's largest ever predator, a prehistoric carnivore 3 times larger than a polar bear. At 23 million years old, this discovery made headlines the world over and is considered essential for developing understanding of the evolution of mammals.
It shows the wealth of Africa in terms of our past ecosystems and what used to be in Africa, and we can do reconstructions of the environment from these, the possible diets from these, and what other animals they would have interacted with.
But this important fossil was not unearthed this year. It had actually been in the museum for over 40 years before it was recognised as a new species. Museum staff knew the bones were something special. They just didn't know exactly what, and lacked the resources to properly investigate. There are only 7 paleontologists in Kenya.
And 99% of those people who work here are foreigners, foreign people. So it will be important for people in Kenya to understand the importance of this to the country and venture or study things to do with human origins and evolution.
The museum has not changed much since the 1960s. A card-based, handwritten filing system is still in place. Between 7,000 and 10,000 new fossils arrive in the museum's laboratory every year, and the task of cleaning and logging each specimen is painstaking. With a backlog that could yet take years to work through, the hope is that many more unidentified evolutionary treasures lie in wait.
Well, first up in the world of business, Malaysia has filed criminal charges against 17 current and former directors at subsidiaries of US financial giant, the Goldman Sachs Group. Malaysia's Attorney General Tommy Thomas says the charges have been filed over the multi-billion-dollar corruption probe at State Fund 1MDB. The group's chief executive, Richard Nod, has also been charged in the case. Thomas said the custodial sentences and criminal fines will be sought against the accused. The U.S. Justice Department said an estimated $4.5 billion were misused by the fund officials from 2009 to 2014. And in sports news, let's take a look at the Pan American Games in Peru. America's Daniel Carr has won gold in the men's 100-meter backstroke swimming final. Brazil's Guilherme Guido claimed silver, while Trinidad and Tobago's Dylan Carter took bronze. While Carr took the top spot in 53.5 seconds, Guido missed out on gold with a slight margin of 0.04 seconds to get silver. Carter reached bronze after finishing 0.92 seconds behind Carr. Meanwhile, Brazil's Larissa Pimenta has clinched gold in the women's judo 52-kilogram category. Mexico's Luz Olvera claimed silver, while Vanessa Godinez of Cuba had to be content with bronze. Well, it's 29 degrees Celsius here in Lahore, but let's take a look at the weather around the world. Well, that was all I have from the news bulletin at the moment, but do stay tuned. I'll be back in about half an hour with the news headlines. Thanks for watching Indus News. Stay with us.